A large moon hangs in the dark night sky. Ethan, the Heron Prince and Sigil Bearer, his friend Skink, the Raven Princess Ashley, and the former bounty hunter Exeter stand on a rocky mountainside. Below them, and still some distance away, is a tall, spire-like building. Shaped stone walls surround it, and even from this distance, they can see light peeking through windows. Ashley confirms that this is it, their target. Ethan isn't impressed by its appearance, but it is certainly big. He wishes they had the larger force that Ashley had planned to strike with originally. She reminds him that that isn't an option anymore, and then gives us a little bit more information about the facility. Long ago, this was one of the first labs used to create the lesser races. After further experimentation was banned by the Treaty of Willits, the lab was shut down. Publicly, anyways. It was kept going in secret since the lake that it sits in and the mountains surrounding it make such perfect natural deterrents. Their attack won't be easy, but it is necessary. Ashley goes on, suggesting that they leave their gear here, but Exeter cuts her off. He walks past her and Ethan, heading down the mountain. Are they here to do something, or just talk about it? My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 18.11 of Scion, Picking a Side. And I am here to talk about it. Once again, author Ron Marz hits us with a load of information in our first 2 pages of this issue, and I always love that. The lesser races have been a growing concern throughout this whole series, but they've largely been a background concern for that time. Ethan has always seemed to have something more pressing to do. Much like the advanced technology of Avalon, we haven't been given much history or information about them. Where they came from, how they were developed, who created them, how this has been legislated, none of that stuff has been covered at all. There are so many logistical concerns that would come with the creation of a new sentient race of beings, and so many legal questions, and Scion has basically just been blowing past all of them, and Ethan's narrative has been compelling, so I haven't really been worried about commenting on it. I knew eventually we would get there, but I won't lie, I'm glad that we are finally getting some new information. We now know that, at least in the Eastern Ravenlands, that there were multiple labs used to develop the lesser races. Ashley told us in issue 14 that her ancestors seized power, destroyed the lesser races' free city, and then enslaved them, which makes it sound like the lesser races were not originally made to be a workforce. That also means that they were created by whoever ruled this land before the Ravens took power. We were shown 4 statues in King Victor's throne hall, and assuming that those men died of natural causes, they may have lived approximately 80 to 100 years each, and so the Ravens have been ruling this nation for maybe like 500 years. So the lesser races are not a new development, they're actually a pretty old one. But that still leaves us with questions like who created them to begin with? How did they develop that technology? What was their goal? And how did the Ravens seize power from them if they were able to genetically manipulate this new race into creation? These are super interesting questions, and I'm glad to see Scion starting to explore them a bit, but I'm also a little worried that we've been so focused on Ethan that we're not going to take the time to explore them at all. Guest penciler Adrea DiVito joins us for issue 17 of Scion, pairing up with author Ron Marz, inker Rob Hunter, and colorist Jason Lambert. I always thought that this was weird, not DiVito as a fill-in, but rather the timing of this fill-in. CrossGen had pretty explicitly stated that fill-in issues would be every 7 issues, and we ain't on a multiple of 7. Let me double check my math. 7 and 7 is 14, and this is issue 17. Nope. 17 is not a multiple of 7. But I would guess that Jim Chung, or just the production team in general, wanted to focus their efforts on the second Ethan versus Braun fight in issue 13, and honestly I don't blame them. I suspect that a similar thing happened with this particular issue. Our next issue is a fairly big one, and better that Chung get the chance to draw it than a guest artist. Which is not a knock to DiVito at all. He seems to have a real knack for drawing Exeter, which is good because we are about to focus on the big guy for this issue. Not only was DeVito's first published cross-gen pinup one of Exeter, but he also drew the Bounty two-parter, which starred him. He seems pretty comfortable with the character and his heavy brows and his perpetual scowl. It does look like DeVito tried to channel the detailed work that Chung normally does in his own pencils, but I have to say, I think that Rob Hunter's inks do not pair well with him to that effect. The general artwork is detailed, yes, but looking at Ethan or Ashley, the inking just feels a bit too thick. And I'm probably just spoiled looking at the amazing art team of Chung and Hillsman II, but still, the thought is there when I look at these pages. They're good pages, they just aren't as good as our regular art team. Our party makes it to the broken, open gate of the lab without incident. Angry, pained-looking gargoyles seem to flow out of the very stone walls surrounding the lab. Their mouths hang open in quiet screams, an attempt to scare away unwanted attention? Or maybe hint at the screams of pain of those kept inside. Ethan looks up at the building. So, what, we just walk on in? Exeter, who is still in the lead, shoulders past the metal gate. He says that there won't be any guards, and proceeds inside. The party then enters through a grate in the floor, and I'm not sure why or how that happened, but Exeter assures them that they're alone. How does Exeter know that, Ethan asks, and Exeter replies, who in their right mind would want to break into this place? With that, Ethan has finally had enough. Exeter has been strangely eager to get into this place. He seems knowledgeable about it, like he seems really familiar with this location. What aren't you telling us? Ethan demands. The big man pushes open a large door. It's easier to just show them. Inside the room, dozens of large glass tubes are plugged into receptacles in the ceiling and floor. Long cables snake along the ground and ceiling. A stone channel filled with a thick, sickly green liquid runs below one row of the tubes. An even paler fluid fills the tubes, which are big enough to hold a person, if you were wondering. And this isn't even the only level. We can see at least a second floor, and it is filled with even more tubes. Ethan is horrified as he enters this space. This is where those outlaws came from, Ashley says. As they move into the room, Exeter explains that this is all the work of one man, a scientist named Dr. Tyrus. Upon closer inspection, there are actually bodies in the tubes, most of them twisted and malformed. Even Skink grimaces, commenting only that this is inhuman. Ethan, however, leans in for a closer look. Are these things still alive? Or are they... In perfect jump scare fashion, the eyes of Ethan's subject snap open. He shouts and steps back, alarmed, and accidentally backs into Exeter. This is where you came from, isn't it? Exeter pulls back his hood, revealing his face. Yes. He wasn't born here. He was made, created, built to be stronger, faster, tougher than any other lesser race. He managed to escape from the pain and, in doing so, prevented Tyrus from making any more like himself. But he also damned himself to a life of loneliness. Even amongst the lesser races, there is no one else like Exeter. He was shunned by the other lesser races, a creature capable of only destruction. Suddenly, Exeter lashes out, a large fist smashing into the glass tube that Ethan had been examining. The fluid inside pours out, bringing with it the poor wretch inside. Ethan jumps on Exeter, demanding that he stop before he does any more damage. Exeter answers that the only thing they can do for these things is to set them free by destroying them. Ashley kneels next to the being that came out of the tube and rolls it onto its back. Then he'll have his wish, she says, taking its hand gently. This one is already dying. Ethan kneels next to her. He also takes its hand, disgusted that anyone could do this to another living being. Quietly, the creature dies. Everyone is silent for a moment. Ashley asks Ethan if he understands why this place needs to be destroyed, which I didn't think was in question here, but okay. Ethan does seem reluctant to destroy the place, now that he knows that there are living subjects inside. But Exeter is adamant that this place has to go. These experiments cannot live outside of their tubes, and to leave them here condemns them to more suffering and pain. Killing them, in short, is a mercy. Ethan can't quite agree to that, though. What right do they have to make such a decision? Before he can ponder this philosophical question anymore, a man's voice echoes from the shadows above our party. He has visitors, and he doesn't like visitors. I hesitate to call them monsters, because they're clearly meant to be members of the lesser races, but they are really monstrous in appearance, and they're bad guys, so I'm going to call them monsters. So, 4 monsters enter the room. They're all muscular, but they are also very different from each other in their looks. One is a large, goat-legged horned male with bad teeth. Another is a hairy spider-like thing with clawed fingers. The third looks like an orange frogman with big eyes and suckers on its fingers that allow it to stick to the tubes. And the last one has a Cthulhu head, 6 arms, and green skin. Above them, Tyrus gestures at the intruders, ordering them to be killed. Tyrus himself looks like a normal man. He's thin, wearing a brown leather skin-tight suit. Metal devices appear to be attached to his bald head, and he has on black gloves. He also has a black goatee. We'll see later that a metal tube connects the device on his head to the base of his neck. Ethan ignites his sword, shouting at Exeter, "You said there wouldn't be any guards!" The bounty hunter draws his axes from his back. "There aren't any. These aren't guards. These are failures." Exeter bashes the spider thing aside, shouting Tyrus's name. Then he charges straight for the man, allowing Ethan and Ashley to handle their own foes. Using a cable to pull himself up, Exeter kills the frogman and perches on the ledge that Tyrus was standing at. Quote, "The prodigal returns, and I bring death." End quote. Tyrus's blue eyes go wide. "You." Exeter grabs him by the shoulder, lifting Tyrus from the ground. He is a person now. He has a name. But Tyrus scoffs. He cobbled Exeter together from scraps and tissue in a tube. Call yourself whatever you want, you'll still only be what you were made to be. A monster. A sudden blast of electricity shoots from Tyrus's head device, shocking Exeter and forcing him to release Tyrus. He runs, but doesn't get far. Exeter sinks his axe into the stone floor, shouting that he has discovered more humanity in himself than has ever existed in Tyrus. The floor cracks, and the crack, somehow, manages to follow Tyrus. The ground shatters underneath him and falls away. One iron support slab holds the concrete that Tyrus clings to in air, suspending him over a steaming pool of liquid. "Please," Tyrus pleads, "save me!" The iron support shrieks as Exeter moves to the ledge. His weight threatens to break it further. "Show me mercy!" Tyrus cries. But Exeter doesn't move. He just glares down at his creator. "Mercy is a human quality," Exeter says. "I'm a monster. Remember?" He swings his axe down and severs Tyrus's hand. The doctor falls into the liquid, screams once, and then melts back underneath the surface. Exeter just watches. This is a badass scene. Really, Exeter throughout this whole issue comes off as super tough and composed, and this part of it tends to get ignored a little bit, but he comes off really traumatized. We saw last issue that Exeter had been motivated by self-hate. He hunted the other members of the lesser races because he hated that he was of the lesser races, and now we know better why he felt that way. Even amongst the lesser races, there is only one being like Exeter, and it's him. And worse, he was made to be a monster. That was the goal. He knows that. It is very likely that he saw the other subjects here during his stay and was similarly horrified. Remember, even Skink was disgusted by the actions that led to their creation. And if Exeter was created the same way that they were, and these other subjects are all horrible monsters, then why would he be any different? Why would any member of the lesser races be any different? They're all monsters, even Exeter, and they have no worth outside of what someone will pay for them, or the work that they can do. Exeter could hunt them, and so he was useful, and so he had value, and so he did hunt them. Only now, after being shown that his life has more value than just being a monster, does Exeter begin to actually try to have a life. That is what led him to the Sanctuary and has allied him with Ethan and Ashley. He is basically opening up to them here, letting them see his past and his trauma in a way that no one has gotten to before. There is a lot of trust that Exeter is showing these two here, and he barely knows them. We also see, however, that he hasn't processed this trauma. When Exeter confronts Tyrus, he is clearly out for blood, and he does not hesitate to go after Tyrus at all. But I don't really like how this confrontation ends up going down. The core of this scene comes down to Exeter, who is a being that looks like a monster, and who was made to be a monster, confronting Tyrus, who looks like a human, but is a monster. And that basic idea is great. I like that, and I even like Exeter telling Tyrus that he has found more humanity within himself than Tyrus ever had. Again, that's a great stuff, awesome line. But when given a chance to save Tyrus, to actually display mercy, a trait that even Exeter recognizes as being a human trait, he lets Tyrus die. He even tells him, "I am a monster," which flies in the very face of the page that happened just before this one, where he declared his humanity. This scene is contradictory, and that frustrates the crap out of me. I am down with Tyrus dying. My dislike of the scene isn't because of a moral judgment on Exeter. I can absolutely understand why Tyrus had to die. Killing Tyrus will keep other poor members of the lesser races from suffering and being mutilated. Exeter is a floop-doopin' hero here. And this is actually probably like the most triumphant moment that Mars has given us in a while. And I particularly love that contrast because this is also kind of a horrific moment. When we get back to the comic, Ethan and Ashley have finished off the other guards. Ethan is remorseful about having to kill them, but Ashley insists that they didn't have another choice. Even Skink adds that killing them was a necessary act. Exeter returns to the group, telling them that Tyrus is gone. Gone? Ethan asks. You mean dead? Exeter blinks. Yeah. He was the one who made you, right? Ethan asks. Exeter confirms that, adding that he would have made even more if he hadn't killed him. When would this kind of horror stop if Exeter hadn't killed Tyrus? Ethan lowers his head and mutters, "No more." He turns away from the group and walks further into the room. He stands between the two rows of tubes and ignites his sword. Then he swings it. An arc of yellow energy slashes out, destroying many of the tubes and killing those kept inside. Ethan disengages his sword and turns away from all the death. Ashley lays a hand on his soldier, consoling him. It was the right thing to do. Ethan closes his eyes. That doesn't make doing it any easier. He gestures at the room. When did this become doing the right thing? Killing innocent beings so that they won't suffer anymore. When they leave here, they're going to raise this building to the ground, and that'll be the right thing to do too. But Ethan looks at one of the corpses on the floor. But this is all still so wrong. After everything that he has done, everything that Ethan has seen, he just can't keep ignoring this. He can't turn away from the greater good while using his family as an excuse. Whatever the underground needs Ethan to do, they'll have it. From here on out, his first loyalty is to them. Obviously, y'all, this is a big story change. Mars has been building to it for a while, though. After all, Ethan has been debating whether or not to help the Underground basically since issue 3. but he finally makes a decision here. So why here? Why now? Mars is obviously suggesting that the immediacy of this particular horror has had a great effect on Ethan. That seeing the deformed test subjects has touched him. That having to kill them in order to save them has affected him. But Ethan has been faced with the pain and suffering of the lesser races before. Ashley showed Ethan the lesser races being worked and whipped in the mine back in issue 3, and Ethan witnessed the poor living conditions of the sanctuary back in issue 10. But Ethan also had goals that were far more personal to him at the time, getting home to his family, warning them of impending war, and avenging Artor's death. But this time, when the group attacks this lab, Ethan doesn't have a goal. He is literally aimless other than returning home, and even then, that's just because he doesn't really have anywhere else to go. So this decision doesn't come out of nowhere. Ethan has actually been justifying his unofficial alliance with the Underground for our past several issues. When Ethan and Ashley fled the capital, at first he needed to stay with Ashley in order to escape. And okay, fine, once they're out of the city, then he can head home. But once they got out of the city, Ethan decided to escort Ashley to the sanctuary. And she didn't really need an escort. Ashley knew the route, she knew where to camp, she has done this before, and there were no immediate threats at the time that would put her in danger. But Ethan didn't want to leave her or the Underground yet, so he tagged along to the sanctuary. Finally, once they got to the sanctuary, Ethan had every reason to leave, because the sanctuary was gone, burned to the ground, and everyone there was dead. Ethan didn't owe them a thing, and he could have easily chosen that moment to leave. But again, he chose to stay with Ashley, and he chose to help her destroy this lab. Part of this is because, let's face it, he digs Ashley, he's just into her. But the main reason that he's sticking around is honestly because he knows in his heart that this is the right thing to do. He has known it the whole time, and for the first time in Scion's history, he hasn't had some personal bullshit to take care of first. The creative team has also been hinting at this change by using Ethan's wardrobe. I mentioned last episode that Ethan had ditched the heron clothing in favor of creams, browns, and tans, very neutral color tones. And this was done to indicate Ethan's shift in priorities. He is no longer a hero of the Heron Nation, a prince avenging his slain brother. He's just a man now, doing whatever he thinks is right. Unfortunately, fill-in artist Adrea DiVito draws Ethan in his original clothing. Literally, this is the same basic set of clothes that Ethan was wearing back in issues 1 through 4. This kind of indicates to me that the wardrobe change may have come more from the artistic team than the writing team. If author Ron Mars had indicated the costume change in the script, then DeVito should have gone along with it too. The only reason I can think that he didn't go along with it is because it wasn't in the script. Which is a real shame, because I think that this is a really great, subtle way to show Ethan's character development before even acknowledging it within the story itself. I also dig that Ethan's morals are a lot more challenged here. It's easy to forget that Ethan isn't big on killing people. I'm honestly not sure why it's so easy to forget that. When Ethan balked at mercy killing the one lesser racist member, I was, honestly surprised. Ethan has been so dead set on killing Braun, and literally, you would ask him, hey, do you really think you should be doing this? And he's like, yep, I promised to kill Braun. I'm gonna go kill Braun. Killing's cool. And so you really forget that Ethan has only ever killed someone on the battlefield before. He killed during the Battle of Point Corday, and he killed the one guerrilla outlaw when they were attacked. And honestly, that's been it. And he was honestly even upset about Tyrus getting killed. He was about ready to argue with Exeter in that scene. But what choice do they have at this point? Tyrus was making beings that couldn't survive, enslaving the rejects as his personal muscle, and then sentencing them to terrible lives. Remember, the outlaw gorilla who fought Ethan was shouting at him about being made as a weapon. Much like Exeter, he only viewed himself as a monster, as something capable of harming others. Killing Tyrus was the right thing to do, as was mercy killing those victims of his, But Ethan makes the point that things should have never gotten this far to begin with. Yes, it is right to end this suffering, but this suffering should never have happened. This is wrong, utterly wrong. And so Ethan makes the decision to support the underground fully. The question now is, how is his family going to take that news? Issue 18 then sees the return of our main creative team, that of Mars, Chung, Hillsman II, and Ponser. The art is proportionally sumptuous, starting us off on a single-page shot of King Dane, his arms folded behind his back, his head bowed with the weight of responsibility. He is colored all in green light, and as we turn the page, we see that he and his support staff, which includes Queen Mariella, are in the Heron War Room. The actions taken today could very well decide the fate of the war, he says, as well as the fate of their family. Dane is the king, yes, but he feels so helpless right now. Mariella rests a hand on his shoulder. They knew that this day might come, someday. And Dane knows. The war with the Ravens was inevitable, if not now, then in the next generation's time. Dane did not ask for this war, but he has faced it head-on the whole time. But they've already had to bury a child. Will they have to sacrifice more? Right off the bat, Mars is establishing our tone and stakes for this issue. This is not a fun-filled fantasy adventure with some sci-fi elements thrown in for color. This is a war. People will die. And not just people, but Dane and Mariella's children could die. We, the audience, see those characters as adults, and to some degree as adventurers and heirs, but to their parents, these are their kids. And they're doing their duty. They are doing what is expected of them and what was asked of them, but they have been asked to potentially die. Princess Elena took a Raven fortress with a limited group of soldiers. She is trapped in enemy territory, and the lands surrounding her are filled with people who basically want her dead. They don't even know if she's still alive right now, and they have sent their other son, Prince Kai, to back her up. He might just be joining her in death if things go wrong. So they have to ask, is a war over insulted feelings worth spending their children's lives? Is this war worthwhile, or is it wasteful? Having set a somber, respectful tone, Mars then moves us to the war front, but strangely, not the Heron war front. We're inside of a Raven medical tent, where a soldier is getting their arm healed by one of those metal-faced healer dudes that we saw back in the first issue. As he bites down on a piece of metal, his arm is healed, and we get to listen in to war reports that are being given around him. Their northern defenses have collapsed. There are no reinforcements coming, their air support is non-existent. The Heron ships have been barraging them from the sea, providing cover for their landing. This has allowed the Heron infantry to overtake the Raven siege positions. Things, basically, are not going well for the Ravens. But our man Karn's arm has been fully healed. It will function properly. So that's pretty good. Some form of Raven military leader ducks into the tent, ordering every able man to the field. He stops when he sees Karn, aware that he was just injured and healed, but they need him. Their force is caught between the Heron landing force and the main body of the Raven defenses, and they are getting pounded for it. If Karn wants to get home to his wife and daughter, he's going to need to fight his way there. Karn nods. He slips on a metal glove and picks up his sword. He understands the stakes. The Herons might take this scrap of land, but they'll pay for every step of it in blood. He swears it. He steps outside, and we see a pulled-out view of the battlefield, including the garrison that Princess Elena took and that the Heron ships are backing up. More importantly, Mars is contrasting this scene with the one that we just saw with King Dane. Dane fears that he might lose his children in this war, while Karn is fighting in order to defend his family. Both of them want to protect what's precious to them. Who, though, is morally right here? Who is morally wrong? Who, when defending their lifestyle, is just a better person? Karn then charges into the skirmish, shouting, "For the Ruby Throne!" He slices through two Heron soldiers, crying out that they'll push back these damn invaders. A blade suddenly passes through Karn's back, and we pull back to see Prince Kai behind him. More Heron soldiers are running behind him, and he issues orders. As they charge forward, we focus on Karn's face, resting on the dirt as the life bleeds out of him. Prince Kai and another soldier move carefully through the battlefield. The soldier is eager to move on, but Kai knows not to be overconfident. They need to rout the Raven forces and reach Elena's fortress. The soldier is glad for the challenge, eager to kill more Ravens. He charges off, looking for a fight, but Kai hangs back. "I was once that reckless," he notes quietly. Another Raven soldier charges Kai from his right, challenging him. The fight is a short one, and Kai runs the man through relatively easily. "That's the problem with you Ravens," Kai says. "Kill one of you and there's another to take your place." Out of the corner of the panel, we see another figure walking through the dust of battle. And it is a Raven. But it's Princess Ashley. Kai charges at her, and only his complaint alerts her to his attack. She manages to draw her blade and defend herself, but interestingly, her sword is not red, like the rest of the Raven soldiers. It's gray. It's just a sword. Ashley blocks the strike, and you can see the pain in her expression as she recognizes Kai. He punches her in the face, knocking her to the ground, glad that she recognizes him. He grabs her by her hair and pulls her body back, allowing him to press his sword across her throat. "At least you'll know your killer's name," Kai says. "Just like my brother did." Before he can kill Ashley like Braun killed Artor, though, Ethan dives in, shouting for his brother. He tackles Kai, shoving him back, and when Kai recognizes his brother, he shouts his name and hugs him. Ethan then helps Kai up, and Kai asks what is he doing here? Ethan tries to answer as vaguely as possible, but he's cut off when Kai asks why he's traveling with a Raven soldier. Ethan then helps Ashley up and asks if she's okay. She reports that she has a split lip, but she'll be fine. Ethan then goes on to explain that she's the Raven Princess. He formally introduces Ashley to Kai, and Ashley stares at his brother. Yeah, they've met. Kai is incredulous. "You're traveling with the sister of the man who killed our brother." Ashley isn't like Braun, Ethan defends. She has as much reason to hate Braun as we do. "Okay then," Kai says, "so they're what? Friends? Lovers? What is this?" Ethan and Ashley look at each other, and then Ethan looks away. No. Despite standing on a battlefield, Kai then asks to hear the entire story. What did Ethan do here in the Ravenlands? And somehow, despite standing in the middle of a battlefield, Ethan does give us a recap of pretty much all of Scion since issue 13, which is another Ron Mars-style way of getting us caught up, despite having a story this far page at the beginning of the comic. There's some habits you just can't break. When they had heard Elena was in trouble, though, Ethan and his group came to see if they could help. They did not know that there was going to be a landing force backing her up, or that Kai would be there, so that is a welcome surprise. Oh, and Ethan explains that the we is more than him and Ashley. In the distance, another Raven soldier goes flying as Exeter exits the dust of war. Skink is with him and they approach our group. Skink greets Kai, noting that he promised to look after Ethan, and he has. Exeter introduces himself, and Kai recognizes the name. He cannot wait to hear that story. Ethan has a way of bringing home strays, it seems. Exeter looks at Ethan, reporting that the fight is almost over. There's a clear run to the fortress, so now is the time to make the move. Prince Kai agrees, but they'll be stepping over Raven bodies to do it. "You gonna have any trouble with that, Princess?" he asks, scowling at Ashley. Ashley then gives a big speech about her perspective and experiences. She joined the underground to free the lesser races from slavery. She didn't do it because she wanted to tear down her country. She walked through this battlefield wondering whose side she was on, who she should be fighting. That is how she's had to live most of her life, and she harmed no one on this battlefield. So you can take your attitude and you can stick it up your... Ethan backs her up, though, and adds that this is not the time or the place for that kind of discussion. Kai agrees, but once they reach their sister, they need to have a talk. This is all plot work, mostly, although it is disguised as character interaction. We don't get enough time with this group to get into any character growth or change. Mars is just setting the stage for those conversations to happen later on. I thought that Kai's encounter with Ashley was actually a great one, perfectly using Kai's press a blade to someone's throat now, ask questions later style of fighting. He did it to Braun, he did it to Burned Rex, and now he has done it to Ashley. Kai clearly believes in sticking with what he knows, and to be fair, he's pretty good at it. Thankfully, though, Ethan saves Ashley, and while her feelings are hurt, she doesn't appear to be holding a grudge. I appreciate her defending her position against Kai, though. We've seen her do the same with Ethan back in issue 13, arguing that she does want the Ravenlands to change, but she does not want to see the Ravenlands destroyed. She is a patriot, she loves her country, she just wishes it was doing better. I appreciate her not fighting anyone in this particular battlefield, too. Ethan, as our lead character, has had his inner turmoil focused on a lot in this book, but Ashley has gotten much less focus. This is a really good way to display her own inner problems without shifting the whole focus of the book, so we still get to see some depth here, and she doesn't have to steal the limelight. It's very interesting that when asked if they're a couple, Ashley just looks at Ethan. She doesn't say anything, she just looks at him, and Ethan is the one who says no. Ashley, out of the two of them, has definitely been the one who is more eager to touch Ethan, like she would rest a hand on his chest, that kind of thing. But I also feel like Ethan has been the one who's been more open emotionally. When he and Ashley were spatting at the start of issue 14, he was the one who thanked Ashley first, trying to smooth things over. So it's interesting that on the one hand, Ashley is more of a physical character and Ethan is more of a emotional character. That's a cool contrast to have, despite the fact that they've got kind of similar executions for their personality. So their relationship feels very equal, but they aren't a couple yet. They do feel like a couple for sure. I had totally forgotten that this moment happened at all. So I do think that it's kind of hilarious that Ashley looks to Ethan for confirmation or denial, and he just says no. Because I really wonder how she felt about that moment. As our group enters the garrison, they stop by a knight and ask for directions. He points them towards Elena's location, and then Kai tells Ethan how stoked their parents are going to be to see him when he gets home. And Ethan is like, well, about that. But then they find Elena, and they're all distracted by a family reunion. The siblings hug, and Elena says that she is more relieved to see them here than to see the siege broken. Ethan, unfortunately, reports that Braun is still alive, and again, Elena's just happy to have Ethan alive. Back when Ethan declared that he was going to go after Braun, Elena was one of the people who told him not to bother going. She was against this to begin with. So it's cool to see her main concern being Ethan's safety written consistently over a span of more than a dozen issues. Kai then says hello to Burned Rex, who came ashore once the battle's outcome had been decided. Ethan thanks Rex for whatever role he played in this particular victory. Rex downplays his own involvement. Strategy is worthless without brave soldiers to carry it out. It's good to see Ethan, though, he adds. How soon will he be returning home? Kai jumps in here, immediately offering a hover ship. Ethan can be back on Heron soil in 2 days' time. It's going to be awesome, man. Which is when Ethan has to break everyone's hearts. He isn't here to go home. Oh, dope, Elena says. So you're staying with the invasion force? We'd love to have you. And yes, Ethan says, he is staying in the east, but not as part of the invasion force. He has promised Ashley his help as part of the underground. And our final panel is everybody being surprised by this, even Ashley. So this is where Ron Mars's writing style shifts a little bit. Up to this point, Mars has generally been giving us either nice stories that are done in one issue, or stories that end on a cliffhanger. Generally, even those cliffhangers feel more like a way to pull us into the next story, like the transition from issue 9 to issue 10. Issue 9 was all about Ethan encountering Exeter for the second time, and it ended on the cliffhanger of him finding the sanctuary. a total shift in plot focus that then led us into issue 10, which was Ethan dealing with the Sanctuary. But this issue's whole focus is just getting Ethan to his family, and it pushes off their dramatic conversation until the next issue. There's a little bit of story decompression happening here, and I won't lie, I kind of hate it. Decompression is not a bad writing technique in and of itself in the world of comic books. When used properly, decompression allows an author to stretch a story out a little bit and focus more on the characterization and how the cast reacts to whatever situation they find themselves in. Decompression got really popular when comic books started writing for a story arc, because instead of writing a story that was maybe broken into 2 issues, you now broke that story into 6 issues, and you could focus on all of the individual characters, or your villain, a lot more. But with this story, Mars spends the whole issue teasing Ethan's confrontation with his siblings, and then it ends before they can even get into it. Now, issue 19 is going to have to finish this conversation and then move us on to whatever the next problem is, which will probably get pushed off to issue 20, because by the time we get to it, the book's going to be over. So there are definitely some pacing problems here for me. There isn't much to comment on with this final scene either, because nothing really happens, it's just everybody getting caught up. The Heron kids are reunited, they're relieved to see Ethan alive, and they're eager to get him home, and Ethan says that he isn't going home. That's it. The reunion is nice, and it was nice to see Rex not get accused of being a suspicious jerk for a scene. That's a good change of pace for him. But ending us on this cliffhanger announcement that Ethan has pledged his loyalty to the Underground is how we ended the last issue. I've seen this before, so I'm a little frustrated by it. This issue then ends with one final scene before I get too far off on a tangent. We opened this book with King Dane in his war room with green coloring, and we end on King Braun in his war room with red coloring. He curses the fact that the Ravens managed to land a force and reinforce the garrison. Mai Shen tries to calm him down, reminding him that they only lost a battle, not the war. Braun growls that she's a military advisor. She shouldn't advise him of the obvious. Braun then says that his mistake has been staying in the keep and letting others fight for him. He's a warrior. He belongs on the battlefield. His fists crack with red energy as he promises that he will give them all a reason to fear him. And again, this is Mars setting things up for the future. Braun is honestly not the type of guy to sit out a good fight anyways, so I'm kind of surprised that it took him this long to get involved personally. He just does not have the temperament to get reports in a war room and then make troop adjustments. Like, he is totally the guy who would get pissed off when losing at Risk and then knock over the game board. He's a floopin' punk. But more interestingly, Mars is obviously building this scene to complement the earlier scene with King Dane. They're both exactly 2 pages long, they have the exact same kind of art direction, and they both feature a king commenting on the war. And again, Dane was reluctant to engage in this war, but he knows that he has to, even if he fears the cost. But Braun doesn't have those concerns at all. This whole war kicked off because of his hurt feelings, and those feelings have been hurt even more here. The cost of this war? Who cares? Who's responsible for this war? Who cares? He's been insulted, and those who did it must be made to pay. We are being shown outright that Dane is far more concerned about the moral underpinnings of this war effort, making him feel more like a good guy, while Braun doesn't give a single no swearing, making him feel more like a bad guy. I get the feeling that if I read and broke down issues 18 and 19 together, they would probably pair very well, but issues 17 and 18 just do not. Between the contradictory delivery of Exeter in issue 17 and putting off the Heron kids' confrontation to issue 19, these are probably 2 of my least favorite issues of Scion. Which is a shame, because issue 18 is gorgeous. Like, Justin Ponser's coloring is so over the top with this one. Like, every issue just looks prettier than the last issue. There's so many more small coloring details in this It's just amazing. It's also interesting to note that the cover of this issue is not the cover that was originally solicited. In issue 17, there is a promo page for the next issue, and the cover is basically the same. We've got a battlefield of Raven and Heron soldiers filling up most of the image. But there is a split in the center of it, and we have a big close-up of Ethan's face on the left and Ashley's face on the right. In the original promo, everything is colored like normal, but Ethan and Ashley's faces have been left opaque so that you can see through them. But their eyes are colored their normal colors, so are their hair. You can make out just the faintest hint of skin tone. But in the published cover, Ethan and Ashley are colored blue and red, highlighting the divide between them and their two nations. It's a particularly neat cover because this was drawn in 3 pieces. We have one image of Ethan, one image of Ashley, and then we have one of the battlefield, and they were then all digitally overlaid and put together. So you had to color 3 separate images, overlay them over top, drop the opacity so that you could basically see through Ethan and Ashley's face to this battlefield in the background. It's really neat. CrossGen's use of digital technology to produce as quality a product as they can is on full display here. It just totally works. There's also a special thanks in this issue for the help of inker John Dell on the cover, and again, they technically had to ink 3 covers to make 1 cover, so John probably backed him up. And overall, the color effect looks really well. I'm a little torn, because I kind of think that the flesh-toned cover looks a little better, personally. But it's very striking with the dual colors, and it's the split in the middle is colored white, so you've got kind of this red, white, and blue effect going on, and this particular issue kind of brings up the divide between the Herons and the Ravens, so it's a little bit there. This cover doesn't feel very connected, but it is artistically very pretty to look at. In our next issue, Ethan's brother and sister confront him over his decision to aid the underground and basically abandon his family. Behind the scenes, military advisors and hidden gods, Mai Shen and Burned Rex meet for the first time in their own confrontation. And finally, our heroes begin looking for a new home for the underground in Comic Book Breakdown episode 18.12 of Scion, Finding Sanctuary. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.